welcome to the Asset Revolution podcast, where each week your hosts from Arbor Digital provide educational opportunities for financial advisors and individual investors to gain knowledge in this emerging powerhouse that is digital asset investing. The Asset Revolution podcast is your connection to the future of digital assets and an opportunity for anyone to get off zero. Let's dive in. All right, everybody. Welcome to this new edition of Asset Revolution. I'm very excited for our guest today, Cathy Yoon, who has a ton of experience, not just in crypto world, but also in traditional world, and maybe a different capacity than what you've heard on this podcast so far. So I hope that's enough of a teaser. And as you all know, I like to let my guests introduce themselves. So Cathy, please take a minute to introduce who you are, both just as an individual and also your professional career as well, if you don't mind.
Sure. I bet that lead in, I sound like a woman of mystery and intrigue, and definitely not the case. It's just what you see is what you get. Okay. I think before I get into like the work that I've done on the crypto blockchain side, I lifelong New Yorker, left for a few years to go to college elsewhere, but I think New York is in my blood. And so I think you'll see a lot of that come out throughout our discussion. I am a lawyer, but I'm also an adventure seeker, thrill seeker. And I think that's why I really love crypto, snowboarder, hiking, all that stuff. So,
hold on. Okay, hold on. I can't let you say those things and not actually dive into a little bit. So I think one of the things I saw on your Twitter profile, if I'm not mistaken, was that you were an eternal dreamer and a goofball.
Yeah.
Okay. So give me how you're an eternal dreamer, and then give me a little bit of a goofball.
I'm always dreaming, I tend to I'm in this space because there's so much potential of all the change that can happen. I tend to try to see the good in people first, and just try to really see the positive sides of things. I get disappointed and let down from time to time, but I'd rather start at that threshold than be pleasantly surprised all the time. Yep. Right. So it's, for me, it just, even with something like COVID, right, try to see like the good things that have come out. And maybe it's given us an opportunity to kind of reconnect with people because everything's done virtually. And so you're reaching out and trying to find the connections that you normally wouldn't have, just because your day-to-day life gets so busy. But now when everyone was home, you kind of reconnected. I fell in love with cooking again, and then I hated cooking again. It's just one of those things where I loved working in my pajamas, and then I hated working in my pajamas. So it's just, you have the good and the bad. And I think you just need to have a lot of that balance to kind of get you through.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you for diving. I know it's a little off topic, but when I read that, I really resonated with it because I am also, as you can see right here, I've dreamed there, never stop dreaming. Right. And I think we take a similar view. I like to see the good in things, but also recognize the pain and the suffering and the troubles that we all go through. Right. Because those are always going to exist, but that just enables the ability to dream. So I love you going into that. And then as a goofball, my wife is just immune to it by now, but I'm a goofball at heart too. I'm an eternal kid, even though as I grow older and I guess maybe a little wiser. But so thank you for diving into that. Because I like to do that too. Because, like a lot of people we get to know each other professionally. But I think one thing is speaking to you about kind of what have we learned from COVID. I think everybody got a sense of each other on a deeper level, right? Because we all became a little bit more comfortable to talk about things that maybe we wouldn't have talked about if we just stayed in the office the whole time. So that's what you made me think of.
And, the thing is like, there are a lot of things I take very seriously. I take my job seriously. I take my team seriously, my friends, my family. But at the same time, if you can't find the humor in your own failures or, all of like the bad things around you, and it's, for me, it's like when my friends get married, what I wish them is like so much laughter that you want to pee like your pants or something. You know what I mean? And it's just, you know, that you're able to have that much fun and to laugh so hard. Like, it's not like in a life of eternal happiness, right? Because that gets kind of cliched and old and stale. But I feel like if you ask anyone what their favorite moments are with their significant others or with their friends and family, it's just when you're laughing so hard that you're crying and you can't talk and like you're hyperventilating, and it's like you're sharing in that moment. And for me, it's just like, if it means I let my guard down a little to allow that type of laughter, then so much better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Cause that's essentially, these conversations that we have are meant to kind of have that little bit of a feel to it. Really bring the human side to it, bring that energy out. So I really appreciate you joining us today. So now that we know a little bit about Cathy, the human, tell us a little bit about Cathy, the professional now.
So Cathy, the professional, is, you know, trying to trying to maintain my sense of humor and my like dreamer self by also working and operating you know, heart and soul in the blockchain crypto space. For me, I'm a huge believer of blockchain as, you know, technology, as a tech stack. And that's something that, you know, people should embrace, not as something that's scary or terrifying or something that leads to like nefarious bad acts, but as a new way. It's not even a new way, it's really database technology, right? So it's taking something like really, really simple, but using it in a way that allows for greater transparency and, you know, clarity and more truth, right? I like that. And so, you know, for me, that's the heart and core of it. And then there's like the crypto side, which is a use case of blockchain. I think people should know that it's a subset and not exactly, you know, technology on its own. And then, you know, it just so happened over the last few years that I have really fallen into working with projects and teams and founders, and with large financial institutions, and trying to build a capital markets infrastructure for digital assets with a focus on digital securities. You know, for someone who loves crypto, it's sometimes, you know, some of my friends make fun of me. They're like, come on, I can't believe you're selling out and going on the security side. But at the same time, I think, you know, there's not a lot of attention being put on the security side of things. A lot of emphasis on crypto, both the good and the bad. But I do think that, you know, the security side, there's a lot to move forward in that space. And while people are, you know, kind of trying to scratch their heads and figure out whether or not the SEC thinks, you know, a blockchain-based token is a security, there are those actually being put out as securities. And, you know, unfortunately, there's still some regulatory uncertainty there. But that's what makes my job so great. I'm general counsel of INX Limited. We own 2 trading platforms. One is a cryptocurrency exchange, and the other is a digital security ATS, where we facilitate secondary trading of digital securities. And so for me, it's kind of the best of both worlds. I get to deal with the crypto side and the security side. So I get to, you know, really work on both things. But also going more towards building out a greater capital markets infrastructure, we're also diving into the derivative side of things. And we can kind of talk more about this later when we talk about different types of, you know, investment vehicles and products and assets. But right now, we really want to take baby steps on the derivative side. So maybe it's just not dealing with the actual underlying asset, but doing something like a non-deliverable forward, where large financial institutions who want, you know, some early, easy exposure to crypto can deal with these forwards where you're really just kind of trading on the price volatility without holding the underlying asset. And so that kind of alleviates some of, you know, the pain points with custody, but it also allows you to kind of play in the sandbox a little on that side. So, you know, for me, it's I really wanted to work with a project that covered a lot of different things. And we're also trying to be a larger market participant, not just by sticking in our own lane on the regulated side of things, because we have regulated trading platforms, but also working with DeFi protocols and seeing if there's a way to serve as a bridge from the traditional side to centralized, trading platforms to decentralized. So we really want to be able to position ourselves and not be seen as an outlier where the securities are all the way on this side and crypto's all the way here, but really to kind of be able to bridge it and add a regulatory on-ramp if we can.
Oh, yeah. And I love that because you bring having that approach and being where you are now brings such a unique perspective to what's happening in a more broad sense. And, the audience for this podcast is primarily financial advisors, but there will be some, end consumers that will hear this. So I love that. And I love that. And I hope that today we're going to make some of this tangible. And that's really, I love like what you try to do and what we've talked about, what I've read about you and what I've seen before is that we're going to try to do that today, right? Make tangible kind of some of those things for the audience, kind of what's happening and given your perspective. And actually real quick, you weren't always in crypto, right? Like you spent many years not on the crypto side, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have probably been on the crypto side full time for, last 4.5 years. Doesn't seem like a long time when you talk to other people when they're giving their credentials. Oh, they've been in this industry for 2.5, 3 decades or that type of thing. But I have to say, it feels like I've been around for 3 decades at this point in the crypto space. But no, I was it's so funny when I first went into law school, doing large public company M&A deals was the hot thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of wanted to do it and see your tombstone, and which is like an advertisement in a newspaper showing off your deal, right? And so it's just, and I probably just aged myself by using the term tombstone, and newspapers and print. But it was just one of those things where you're working on these like high profile deals, and there was a lot of excitement. I mean, that's why I could never be a litigator. I mean, working on one case for the bulk of your career just sounds terrible to me. Mm-hmm. But to work with really, innovative and interesting companies going through all these business combinations, I love the pressure, time pressure, and really working towards getting things done. So I did that for over, probably the first over a decade of my career, and then I kind of slowly eased over from doing large public company deals, private company deals for hedge funds, private equity funds, other large financial institutions, and then really started pivoting over to first financial institutions looking at blockchain as a technology. A few years ago, banks were kind of saying, yeah, we should probably look at it, but we don't think it's going to be anything.
Yeah. Was it blockchain, not Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it was definitely more on the enterprise permission side, where it wasn't even, looking at public blockchain type stuff, but kind of using that underlying, distributed ledger technology, DLT, yep. And figuring out how it works. So, that's how you get something like JPM coin, where it is a closed permissioned internal blockchain to JPM that allows for interbank, internal to JPM.
Yeah.
Right. So those types of transactions, as opposed to doing transactions on a wider scale. Mm-hmm. But I feel like, places have gone, banks have come a long way. And when I left the bank I was at in 2017, it was still very much, exploratory stage. And since then they have come out with many announcements with lots of different investments, and they were, thinking of rolling out all these new, product offerings. And so I feel like if you're seeing large banks who have, historically had very conservative business lines, they weren't really there to kind of rock the boat, but to really provide, the plumbing for Wall Street, right? Just kind of being in the background and kind of plugging away. And now that they're coming out and saying, well, we're definitely exploring this. We've had lots of inquiries from our internal clients, and they said that they want to get involved, but they want to do it with a trusted name, like those institutions. And so I think right now those large financial institutions can't ignore this anymore. And so now you're seeing more of a proliferation of new product offerings, ways to give a lot of comfort for a lot of institutions, investment advisors. I think at this point, you're doing your clients a disservice if you don't start learning about this and what the value proposition is for your clients, and that additional offering. I think it just shows that you are listening to the market, you're listening to the clients, and you're trying to find ways to do this in a responsible way.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that. And it has nothing to do with actually allocating capital, right? I think a lot of conversations we have with advisors, they think when they schedule a demo with us, I think they expect one thing, but then when we talk to them and we actually propose that the first thing you should do is take this education course or consume these resources that we've put together for advisors that can help you take that, that blue pill down into the rabbit hole, right? And do that first. And then, let's keep talking. We'll set up a plan in place to help you, go along the advisor spectrum. The very first episode I did was kind of about the advisor adoption spectrum. And so that's where you just hit it on the head. Is it starts with the education piece. Like, don't do anything until you're educated, right? And I think especially with the convergence of traditional assets and the digital world and the digital asset ecosystem. I mean, look at Facebook going to metaverse, right? Changing its name to Meta. You got Microsoft now announcing they're making a play in the metaverse. You got, Nike now filing patents for the metaverse for its symbol and logos and their just do it phrases. So now you have these traditional assets. Like a majority of clients hold Facebook, Nike, Microsoft stocks. And now they're going to see headlines about what they're doing. And they're going to ask their financial advisor, like, hey, how is this going to impact my investment? And so it's almost like they're going to be forced to have these conversations now, even more so than before. So that education is almost going to be forced upon them. But I guess let's do this a little bit, because I think you have a really interesting story to tell, especially around, again, as we mentioned at the beginning, making this a little more tangible. I think a lot of advisors are scared to take this leap because it's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of resources, right? And so the fear doesn't come from like, oh, I don't think I can learn this, or I don't think this is going to be a thing. The fear is like, I can't put my clients at risk, right? Which is a very important question. So I just want to hit you with the question right off the bat that I think a lot of advisors always ask us is, the fear is that regulators are just going to regulate crypto out of existence. So do you have a response to that? Again, I think you have a very unique perspective given where you are and you're positioned in the industry and your experience. What do you say to that?
I mean, I hear it all the time, and I even hear it from other lawyers saying, do I make the move from going to a law firm, being in the traditional space? Do I go into crypto? And then the second question is, will it be around into 5 years? Am I making a huge mistake? Am I throwing away, all of this goodwill and everything that I've done? And if I start focusing on this space, is it going to be for naught? Because especially in the US, the regulators are going to just shut it down. Mm-hmm. No, the answer is no. I mean, at this point, we're at the point of no return, I think. Whether or not it looks like what we have today, that's the other question, right? I think the question is, how are we going to get to the point where it continually, evolves and, there's new innovation? I think one of the biggest criticisms about blockchain and some of the, I guess I just should level set. There's not just one blockchain, right? There's several blockchains. And I think people should understand when you're talking about blockchain, you should ask, well, which one are you talking about? And I think that's, level, let's kind of think about there. And the reason why there are different blockchains right now is because, they offer different things. So when you think about the most well-known one, which is the Bitcoin blockchain, right? There's a lot of value being derived from that right now. But when you're talking about using it as a way to transact, transactions take a very long time to process. And when we're in the age of, and I used to know the numbers off the top of my head, but, when you think of financial transactions, you think about the number per, transactions a minute that a MasterCard or Visa is able to process, right? And I think when you think about it, that's what people are thinking about.
Yep.
Bitcoin cannot process anywhere close to what, a MasterCard or Visa can process a minute in terms of transactions. So when you're thinking about where we're going in the future, the Bitcoin blockchain is not going to be the basis for where all the transactions are going to happen, because we all live in a society where we want instant gratification. And if we have to wait, 12, 15 minutes for the transaction to be verified in a blockchain, that's not really going to do it for us. So, I think with innovation, you're going to start seeing, how this is going to progress. And unless the regulators come in and decide to say that, all innovation, all technology, we're going to regulate it and we're going to stop it. It's impossible. Like, how are they going to do it? How are they going to police it, right? And so when you think about it,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
so
go ahead.
dive into that, because you said no at the beginning, right? That's not going to be regulated out of existence, right? So I think you're starting to get into kind of why no, like, how can you say that with such high conviction? And please elaborate a little bit more. So, because again, I think we've heard the answers, and I think the audience definitely needs to hear why no, because no matter what you tell them, they're still going to say, well, it still could be. But I would love for you to share, like, why no? Why won't it be?
Because it doesn't. There's actually so many different ways to answer this.
I know it's a big question. I apologize.
No. But it's because there is nothing fundamentally illegal, right, about the technology, what's going on, and it really is. And I think if you take a step back and see what the technology actually does, it allows us to look at the way we currently interact with each other. Mm-hmm. And it cuts certain processes out and makes things a bit more efficient. There are so many benefits that come with this technology that I don't think regulation can end it. It's also one of those things where I believe that once regulators have a better understanding, mm-hmm. And are not scared of it, will become, why were we having these thoughts? And I'm going to quickly go into like the story that we spoke about earlier, just in terms of my own like journey with financial services and technology. And I think it kind of is a great analogy in terms of how people might be thinking about new technology when it comes to financial services. People love to protect their money, right? First and foremost, like they don't want to put it at risk. No one wants to be responsible for it being lost. Mm-hmm. So I was probably in high school when I opened my first bank account, right? And when I opened my first bank account, and I'm totally aging myself at this point. When I opened my first bank account, I was given a bank book, right? It was a little book with like tiny little lines, and I had to put in the amount I deposited. And every time I withdrew, it was kind of like deducting it so you know what you have in your bank account. And whenever I wanted to, get money out of the bank or put money in the bank, I had to go to a teller between 9 and 4 or 5. I don't even know that banking hours anymore. But I would have to go online and actually see a human being face to face in order to do all of this. Mm-hmm. And then, after you do it for years, you just accept it as what it is. And then all of a sudden, I noticed that there are these machines in the lobbies of banks called ATMs. I have to admit, and I was like young at this point, right? And so I must have been, senior in high school, college. There were ATM machines, and then you put this card in, and you are able to get money out of it. So I was able to get money out of it, but for the longest time, I wouldn't make cash deposits into a machine. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to put this money into this thing and have it disappear into this box. Always so scared of it. Got over that eventually, right? Depositing checks became a thing when I didn't have to go to the teller anymore, and I could deposit checks into this machine. And I didn't have to do it during normal banking hours because you could access the vestibule whenever you wanted. But it took me a while. And it's not like and my mother still hasn't gotten to the point where she even trusts ATMs. So it's, so I get that there's this discomfort. And you feel a lot safer when you're dealing with a human being and dealing with your money. So the ATM thing took me actually a really long time to get over. Mm-hmm. But then by the time, skip ahead a few years, and then there's mobile banking. and you have everything on this like little computer that fits in your pocket, your phone, and you're able to send money to people, deposit checks, like take pictures of certain things, and do all these banking activities from the comfort of your home in your pajamas at 2 o'clock in the morning if you need to do it. And this is all during my lifetime of the prime of my years, right? And the thing is that no one ever asked, well, what is this like voodoo? Like, what is this magic? Or what is this technology that allows me to go from dealing with a human being to be able to take a picture of a check? And who even sends checks anymore? You know, it's like you're sending, you know, electronic transfers now when you're kind of sending money. You know, I most of my bills now are taken directly out of my account, or, you know, I send money through one of, you know, the other, you know, companies that allow me to do this. And so I feel like we've come a really long way, but we've all, other than my mother, we have accepted that we are able, the technology has afforded us all these comforts in order to do the same transactions, but they're all being done differently. You don't have, like, all these steps are taken out of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same way you have to think about blockchain. It's just the underlying technology that allows you to go from dealing with a human being at one point to being able to use your phone and mobile apps to be able to engage in financial services. We accept it. We don't ask, what is the magic that makes this happen?
Yep. And it's funny because when you separate the asset from the network, right, which is what we try to coach advisors to doing when we have our conversation. Again, they come in thinking one thing, they leave understanding a little bit more. And one of the things is they don't expect us to do this thing where we're like, hey, like, it's actually separate, right? Bitcoin isn't just one thing. Like, there's the Bitcoin network and there's the Bitcoin, the asset, right? They're two very different things. And the beauty about this space, which is very different than what we're used to in the traditional world, is you can look at both of these things, and both of these things have elements to them that can help you come to some sort of conclusion on how it's being used. Is it being adopted? How well is it working? All that good stuff. And in a way that you can never see traditional financial services. And it's all because of the blockchain technology, right? So once you separate those things, we get to where you're at, where you're saying blockchain technology is just the next evolution of this. And once you come to that conclusion and you intellectually honest with yourself, it's hard not to, you know, not necessarily believe in it, but understand why it won't be regulated. Because like you said, I think I love what you said. I'm actually probably going to use it as a quote for this podcast, is there's nothing illegal about it. It's just an evolution of technology. And I love that. And I think your story is really impactful because it kind of helps think about all the technology we've used from when we were young. Again, I'll date myself a little bit with you, so you don't feel alone in that. But yeah, when I first opened a bank account in high school, right, I had a checkbook and I had to learn how to balance a checkbook first. Like, the first thing the bank, the representative told me I had to learn to do was balance a checkbook. That was the first thing I learned to do. If you go to I would actually say any person who's opening a bank account from now and is to the age of like 25, and you said, what is balancing a checkbook? They're gonna be like, what? So there's this natural evolution, and blockchain is just gonna take us to that next evolution.
But I just kind of quickly touch on what you just said in terms of like when you're talking about people now opening bank accounts or whatever.
Yep.
And not knowing what a checkbook is or balancing, because you have instant access to your accounts now, like on your phone, on your computer, and that type of thing. Let's now talk about, so we are talking about people like you and me and other people that we know, and how we've used banking, how we interact with different, financial institutions who provide us different products and investment products, and how we do all of that. Let's now think about the current 18-year-olds, right, who are now first able to open, brokerage accounts on their own for the first time. Look at the technology that's available to them and how they're interacting and how they engage in financial services and investing and all that other stuff. It's so different from the way we kind of went through the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And for us, kind of keeping up with technology and moving along with it, it's something that we're trying to learn. But for these all these new generations who are coming of age to be able to do this, they have no idea what we just talked about. right?
Yeah.
Their whole thing is, we're going to open things via app. We don't go to brick and mortar institutions anymore. And I think if we want to be responsible in educating people and making sure that we're on top of the pulse, like we have to see what these new investors are seeing and what they accept and what they're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you would do ourselves a disservice if we don't put ourselves in those shoes.
Yep.
And kind of understand it from that perspective as well.
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because especially for the advisor community, the big thing we like to talk about, and, I was a consultant before I got into the crypto space for a big traditional firm. And one of the big things we did, and this is back in 2015, one of the initiatives that we had was, the elements of the generational wealth transfer that's taking place, starting in 2015, and all this was coming to a head. And now, it's only accelerated. Baby boomers are no longer the biggest demographic right now. Millennials have now taken over, right? And this is being foretold. And so the wealth transfer is a big thing for advisors right now. And one thing we try to coach advisors on is, and I think there's a lot of other people who talk a lot about this too, is that the next generation of investors who engage with the space are going to do it very differently. And no longer just a phone call introducing yourself is going to be the thing that gets them to build trust and going to get them to keep their business with you. They're going to want that technology. They're going to want the ease of use. They're going to want to know that their advisor is up to speed, not necessarily, again, with allocating dollars, but knowing that you're staying at the forefront of understanding what's happening and making it real for them. I think that's what's going to set advisors up. And, maybe the advisor is retiring and they'll transition the book to a younger advisor or someone else who in their transition plan. But even so, that advisor needs to be set up. So it goes back to that education piece. But I think this also talks about that in this wealth transfer, like there's a generational shift that's happening. And I think when we were talking before, one thing that stood out to me was like, there's a beauty to that you see, and that like, you can't be late. Like these next generation investors, they actually want to be empowered. They're not lazy and don't want to be unaware. They've watched their parents, they've watched couples, and we've lived and breathed it as advisors. Again, this is back even just 6-7 years ago. You sit with a client or a family, a couple, and one of them has a complete sense of the finances and the other just has no clue. Right. And I think that's not going to be the case anymore with this new generation. And especially as couples become, as that evolves. But I'd like can you tell us a little bit about the way you think about it? Like this idea that the beauty of this is that we're going to create more empowered people when it comes to their finances, and how you can't be lazy or unaware anymore when you engage with and how crypto is accelerating that. Talk to us a little bit about that.
And I think it kind of goes back to, the technology, especially being able to engage in a lot of these interactions through your phone. And I think and I'm just going to talk about Americans. I think most Americans have no clue about investing, right? It's one thing if you get a 401k through work. I know the biggest issue is like, what the hell do I put? Sorry if I can't say that, but like,
you're good now, please.
Where do I allocate my money? Right? Like, how do I allocate my money? Because you're given all this information and you're expected to do your own research. And there, of course, you have a phone number if you want to call someone to kind of help you with those types of investments, but it's not tangible, right? And it's not easy to understand. I think there are new products that have come out, or basically you can choose, an allocation based on the year you expect to retire. And so if you want a moderate risk or, that type of thing, you can kind of pick those types of things. And that's where your retirement money can go. But I think, the stories that I've heard especially during COVID, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. One of my favorite, Bloomberg columnists, he wrote, this article, this column last year where he was talking about the changes he's noticing in terms of behaviors of, John Jane Doe, who have discovered investing all of a sudden, because the way he put it was, you no longer have restaurants, you no longer have movie theaters, you no longer have casinos, you no longer have all these external ways of entertaining yourself, right? So what are people doing? They're doom scrolling on their phone, going through and looking up like all these statistics, and then they're like, you know what, I need a distraction. And if you look at the statistics in terms of the number of like Robinhood users that increased during COVID, it's because they were like, okay, well, I don't have these things. I have, $20 to play with. Let's see, if I can buy some stocks. And the whole idea is that you don't even have to buy full shares. There is something called, fractional ownership of these investments. And people are like, okay, you know what? I can afford $5 of Facebook stock, right? And it's no longer scary. You're not buying, stock that is like $200-$300 a share, but you're like, okay, I'm going to buy $5 worth of this thing. One of my favorite stories is like my nail salon owner. When they first reopened, after lockdown, and they got together and a lot of customers weren't coming in, one of the technicians told the other women about Robinhood. Mm-hmm. And she was teaching them about like how to navigate, the app. And then all of a sudden I would walk in and they would all sit around and talking about like the different stocks or different things that they wanted to invest in. I don't think it would have happened if we weren't in that situation. So all of a sudden you have these people now interacting for the first time with these mobile apps. Investing isn't scary anymore. And I think, and people are taking the time to try to learn, right? And the worst part is that, there's not a lot of there's a lot of bad information out there. And so I think it's incumbent upon, like people like you, me, to get out there in front of this and to really make sure that we're telling the right story. We're talking about, making sure that people are on the same level field.
So yeah, there's so many things we can dive into there, but this makes me think about how, yes, like everyone is taking the time now. And that's where I one of the biggest crimes I feel like of the industry is that a majority of people cannot pass a basic financial literacy test. And yet we have a regulatory body who preaches the idea of protecting investors. One of the main ways to protect anybody in any form or fashion, whether it be financially, whether it be physically, whether it be, your family, whatever the case is, the first is to empower them with education, right? With knowledge, right? And then providing the action steps to act on that knowledge, right? And I think we've done a disservice. And that's where you have the Robinhoods coming in and saying, that's what we're missing. But instead of us waiting for old fuddy-duddies or all these financial institutions to create this for us, and then not only that, to also only keep it within their four walls, to black box it. Why don't we're gonna get away with that. We're gonna create this app. We're gonna give this to everyone. Now, again, there are some pitfalls. There are some pain and suffering that we're gonna go through when we go immediately to that, which we've seen with some cases with Robinhood, with some investors who got in a little over their heads, which makes it paramount the financial advisory industry. Like that's not going away. And I actually think there's even more of a value proposition now for us that our advice is going to be even more needed as investors become more empowered. Because here, and maybe you've seen this as well. And what I've seen is because, again, I'm 36 now. I've got a lot of friends and family now who, are younger, around my age range. And now, they're doctors, they're lawyers like yourself. They're entrepreneurs, they're teachers, right? They're all coming into their own. And now a lot of them have some real wealth to play around with. They've traditionally done it themselves. They've gone on the Robinhoods, they've done some research, but as they've learned more, they've actually learned how much time and energy it takes to actually do it in the right way and over time consistently. So I think that consistency piece is really the value that we can provide, as well as just being a voice for them as well. So I think transitioning from, this, hey, we're just going to black box information, just trust us, right? We are in this every day. No, it's going to be like, hey, I'm going to teach you some stuff and I'm going to empower you. And then you and I are going to come together and meet in the middle to see what's best for you moving forward, right? And I love that that's kind of what's happening. I think blockchain is only going to accelerate that, and crypto is only going to accelerate that. because honestly, individual investors are way more up to speed on crypto than their advisors are. Yeah. So there's a huge gap there. And that's kind of the gap we hope to fill for advisors as well. Do you see similar things? I mean,
I think it's exactly right. So many people are now talking about crypto. I mean, there's still a long way to go and people still know very little about it. But, yesterday, on Monday, I went to my first Knicks game since, pre-COVID, left the Garden, and I was just relishing in the fact that I was able to like see a game in person again. And I'm sitting there and of course I'm trying to like decompress a little, not trying to think about work. And literally at the bar right next to me, there were two guys and two girls, and they were all trying to teach each other about what they knew about crypto. And I was just like, are you kidding me? And they were kind of talking about, what they're investing in. And they're like, well, have you heard of this thing and this thing? When people are talking about, they're going to go and they're like, you know what? Maybe I want to put, the investment decisions or planning in someone else's hands, but they're going to go and say, hey, listen, I'm hearing all of this stuff about Bitcoin, Ethereum, other altcoins, maybe digital securities. I want a portion of my portfolio to reflect those things. And I think it's if it's not happening now, it's definitely happening now, but I would be very surprised if it doesn't become just a more normal part of, an intro or vetting conversation between an advisor and clients. Because you hear about these crazy returns, right? And people are like, well, how do I get a piece of that? But how do I get a piece of that without losing, all of my savings? Or like, I want to retire and this is the, standard of living that I want to have when I retire. So can we find a way to kind of build that in? So it almost every time now that I've gone out, I hear random conversations about crypto, about NFTs, all of those things. And I think, on the security side, it will also increase because I think I can disclose this now. I mean, we're talking to issuers, public company issuers who are listed on the OTC, who want to move away from being, OTC BB listed issuers, and they want to now issue digital securities because they see that transition of like, well, our security now needs to be on the blockchain. This is where we see the future. And all of a sudden you're adding, they're not going to be listed on big boards anymore. They want to be listed on, have a blockchain based security that represents their, public shares, common stock. It's going to be on the blockchain. And these are definitely assets that advisors are going, adding to portfolios. And so I think if you're not going to understand, like the differences of a traditional stock and kind of going through different brokerage houses and broker dealers to be able to buy these things, and not understand what it means for users or even yourself to hold a wallet on behalf of someone else to own these digital securities, I think, that will be a disservice because it's already happening. Issuers are kind of delisting and moving on to blockchain-based trading platforms.
I love that you're talking because again, I think the question we kicked this off with, right, was a big fear of the advisor community is that these are, a lot of them think it was a lottery ticket, right? Like, and a lot of it is, there's a lot of them think it's high probability that these are going to be regulated out of existence. So I think this is also speaking to that the infrastructure that's being built, the pipelines that are being established for the future. That's another reason why you're saying that they're not going to regulate, this isn't going away anytime soon, if at all, if ever, right? It may not, and I like what you said before too, it may not look like how we think it's going to look, and that's totally fine. But it's not going away. It's not going to be regulated. And I think, was it Jerome Powell and both Gary Gensler both said equivocally that they're not going to ban crypto. There's never going to be this outright ban. So I think even with that green check mark, there's still this bit of a fear. So I hope that if you're listening to this, what we've been going through and kind of answering that question too, maybe helps quell that fear of it's not going to get regulated out of existence.
Right. I mean, I think the focus really has to be on the value proposition of the asset that you are talking about, as opposed to the underlying technology that created this asset. Just another way to kind of maybe draw an analogy to what's tangible now. We live in a world filled with digital representations already. And what blockchain does, it enables digital representations of assets. You might not know it, but when you go onto Amazon and you're looking to buy something, you're looking at a digital representation, right? Of the spatula that you want to buy from Amazon, right? You're not looking at the actual spatula that you're going to buy, but it's a digital representation. And you trust in the fact that when you click on it and you say add to cart and you buy, that you are buying this digital representation of this spatula. Yes, it's a little easier because it's a little more tangible. You can see the image.
Well, also that makes the reviews really important, where people post their actual pictures of the product, right?
Right. Well, I mean, but it's just like we already deal in digital representations, right? When your kids, when they're playing video games and they create avatars, they're creating a digital, representation of themselves in the metaverse, right? And so it already happens, not anything new when you're talking about these different games and how people interact. And so when you're talking about a blockchain-based asset, the first thing shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, it's like blockchain, it's scary, because you send money through a mobile app and you're trusting in the technology that your money is going to go from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. And I think, with using something like blockchain, you're able to think outside the box and the type of, asset that you're able to create. Just as an example, the INX token, my company's digital security, we went through the first IPO with the SEC to do the first public offering, but it doesn't represent common stock or even equity of INX. It is basically 40% of positive, cash flow. So once we're positive and once we're bringing in, money, the token holders will share pro rata 40% of that. And so I think when you think about the different value propositions and what you're able to offer, you're not just stuck with whole things like, whole share or whole common stock or that type of thing. You can, bring value to your company, and you can, offer all of these, new and interesting investment opportunities that I don't think that you could normally get with something that's more traditional based. But you need to have transparency too, right? And I think that's the beauty of a blockchain based token. It's just, you have, you can get information, on an app. If you want to see what trading history is like, everything's on there. It's all on the blockchain. You can see if there are big movements, if it's hot all of a sudden, if you'll see if there's one particular wallet address that's doing all of these different things. I mean, who can say today that you can do that with traditional assets?
Yeah, who was I talking to? I forget who I was talking to, but she brought some really interesting ideas. And one thing we were talking about was how blockchain-based projects should actually be encouraged by regulators, and why that the FUD is very real in the media, because actually regulators, ones that understand the space, they get so excited about it is because this is their dream. Like their dream is to be able to have the level of transparency that's been talked about for 100 years, right? To be able to enact on. And actually blockchain is a step towards that. And it was just really eye-opening to me, especially when we were doing our due diligence, to hear that. It's like, oh, interesting. And it's just, it flips it on its head, because if you're just an advisor who reads the Bloomberg headlines or reads Wall Street Journal, all that stuff, like, probably haven't seen a regulator talk about it that much, but they're actually very excited about it because it's going to bring this level of transparency, and they're going to be able to see things that they normally would have never been able to see in it, over the last 100 years. And like that, you start doing these mental models of what if this situation happened and we were on a blockchain, right? So yeah.
I was in talks to get involved with a project up in the Hudson Valley for, a way for, that there are many wealthy families who have many estates in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley. And they have come into, their inheritances, whatever it is, but they're not looking to use their family money to invest in the same things that their parents, grandparents, great grandparents have invested in for them. Things like ESG, huge. Community revitalization of a lot of the towns in upstate New York, because you saw this huge migration from the city upstate during COVID. Yep. And all of a sudden they're looking around their communities and they're saying, we need to do something to help our communities, and creating these funds to help farmers, to help, all these different types of things. And they're looking at where their money can go in different ways. And I think, they're setting a really great example of wanting to think outside the box and wanting their advisors to really come to the table with creative ways. And I think it goes into the whole, it's not just ESG, right? But it's also kind of finding the new cool thing. And so, and it kind of plays part and parcel with that movement also, of how you imagine where your dollars are going, what impact you can have on the community, and invest in a responsible manner. But at the same time, also finding new and creative things, or just kind of saying, well, I don't want to invest in the stuff like my great grandparents did. That wasn't cool. Like, this is the cool stuff. And I think there will be a huge advantage if you have advisors who understand and can come to the table and say, hey, listen, like, let's think about a certain percentage being put into this area. It's hot, it's, cool. And I think coolness actually plays a huge factor these days, as opposed to like the return.
We call it trend investing, from what I see. So, and yeah, you bring up a good point too, because family offices actually have been looking into this for years. We've spoken to a couple family offices in our conversations we have. And yeah, they're very interested and clients actually are bringing a lot of family offices. And then you start to listen to other podcasts and listen to other people. And there's been a way more adoption there. And I think there's this spectrum that comes. And I think it starts off with these different types of businesses that can maybe go further out a little sooner and adopt a little sooner. And then it gets to, down to the RAs. So I think the RAs are our next step, which is why it's so important we start getting this type of information out there, making sure people aren't as afraid of it, making sure they actually know what's happening behind the scenes and know why it won't be regulated out of existence. So I think this has been a great conversation for us to have. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us, and especially sharing that last story, because I think that really resonates with a lot of advisors. Because instead of being scared of it, use this as an opportunity. How would you incorporate it? And that's where, if you're curious, please engage with us at Arbor Digital. We not only have our portfolios, but it's all about how you position it, and we can coach you on how are other advisors doing it as well. How are other family offices? How are hedge funds doing it? Because again, it all comes down to why are you investing? I think when I first came into the business, one of the best pieces of advice I got was, anytime anybody comes to you, they're always going to want to get into the next thing, or they're hot, like, hey, Mark, what do you got for me? Like, again, the old trope was, because I started at Merrill. And so the old trope was like, oh, this guy's going to call me and be like, Mark, what's the hot pick you got for me? Right. And you always just had to not be baited into that and just always say, well, why? What's the money for? What's the purpose of this? So I think it speaks to what you were talking about in this generation, or these inheritances. People really are asking themselves that question. Why? What's the purpose of this money? And they're really taking that to the next level, and they're investing with purpose. And I love it. It's such a great way to, direction for everything to go.
Yeah. I just want to end and say it's what we started off in the beginning. And we're really talking about individual, like, empowerment, right? People are asking more questions. They want to be more involved or understand their finances. And it really is about empowerment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't going to look for guidance, right? They want someone to be a little bit more educated and smarter, and to really keep their finger on the pulse and just be like, listen, I've heard of this thing, what can you tell me about it? Mm-hmm. And it's not, and they're being more involved. So they're going to come with all these different ideas. You're going to hear about all these things in the news. And you should just be prepared.
I love it. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And again, the last thing I'd like us to dive into here for a couple of minutes, because I know you have a lot of other things you like to do. I know networking and building up community is also very important to you, which is so ingrained with the value system of Arbor. Tell us a little bit maybe about one networking group or I guess project that you're working on that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, so I have, it's kind of funny because, early on when I was asked to speak on a lot of panels, I was asked, can you speak on a women in blockchain panel? And I was like, to talk about being a woman in blockchain. And I'm like, I can speak about other things. And it was just kind of one of those jokes where it was just like, okay, you're a woman in blockchain and you're kind of pigeonholed to just speaking about being a woman, as opposed to interacting in it. And for me, I said, well, no, that's not, but I'm going to take it and find all the really amazing women who are actively contributing to the space, and to allow us to kind of find each other, talk to each other, support each other, and to have reference points for, other types of events if they need speakers. It's not just like trying to put a woman, but finding the best qualified person on that panel. If they happen to be a woman, even better. So I've been parts of lots of national and global groups, but I really wanted to focus on people in pretty much the New York tri-state area.
Okay.
And when there were large conferences in the area, I would kind of do a separate subset of women that I thought could really add synergies to each other. Mm-hmm. And if I said, you guys should meet, or I think you would have great conversations, or they're working on this project, so it would be a little bit more curated, instead of kind of like every woman who's working in it. And it kind of started off with just 4 or 5 of us, and then has slowly grown into something that's been a little bit bigger. And I was putting these curated events together before COVID every few weeks. That obviously stopped. We tried to do it over Zoom, not the same thing at all. Yeah. But I'm really happy to say that I'm going to restart them. Okay. With our, we're doing a holiday breakfast as opposed to drinks, because I think during holiday season we could all use a break for our livers.
Especially in New York, yes.
Yeah. So I'm just really excited to be able to kind of foster a safe place for other women to get together in the blockchain and crypto space to talk about their achievements, their struggles, their frustrations, if they're looking for new opportunities. And I would love for it to get bigger. But for me, I love connecting people. It's one of those things where if I hear someone talk about something, my brain is all just automatically like, wait a second, I think this person, even if they don't need it, if they're not even asking for it, I'm like, you know what? I think you should really talk to this person because they're talking about this component. And I think that would be really, really cool. And so it's just the way my brain works. I'm constantly trying to find synergies and match people up. And so, but I don't only do it for women. It's for, everyone in the space. My DMs on Twitter and LinkedIn, all open. And I try to respond to as many people as possible. If they, really want to be connected with people, they want to learn. I can't complain that people have bad information if I'm not willing to put myself out there to give what I think is the good information.
Well, you just hit something for us, which is why we agree with you, especially on that last point. And that's why we take this responsibility. We are the ones in the thick of it. We're the ones spending the time and the energy all day, every day in the space. So we have a duty to provide this information, to get everything out there. And let me just say thank you for everything you're doing, for having that purpose of connecting people. I absolutely love it. So let's say somebody's listening to this and they're very piqued by it and they want to join that group. Where can they find you? How do they get in touch with you? I know you mentioned your Twitter and your LinkedIn, but is there any other way? Like where would you send people?
Probably, I mean, I think those are the two main ones for right now. I'm getting better about checking my LinkedIn messages. But it's, I mean, find a way, connect with me, and we'll find a way to connect.
Okay, great. So we'll put your Twitter and your LinkedIn and the ways to get connected with you in the show notes to make sure. So if you're listening, reach out to Cathy. Again, I hope this conversation has been illuminating and you've learned a little bit about who you'd be interacting with. And I guess I'll end this off with Cathy. Again, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you about all of this stuff.
We have a lot of thoughts, and I'm sure we could have gone for a few more hours.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for joining. Please join us next time, and we will be in contact with you soon. Bye, everybody. We appreciate you listening to this edition of the Asset Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Marc Nichols. Please don't forget to let us know how you like the show by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen. For more downloadable digital asset resources and educational opportunities, please visit us at arbordigital.io. We are here to help you get off zero safely and securely. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to tell someone you care about them. Cheers.
We are financial advisors. However, we are not your financial advisor. Unless you're under contract with or actively speaking with Arbor Capital Management or Arbor Digital, a division of Arbor Capital Management. This podcast is just that, a podcast. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice. If you have individual questions, please reach out.